The following is a segment from the Carl King Podcast. If you enjoy this show, be sure to like, subscribe, and send us burritos. Up next is Escape from New York from 1981, directed by John Carpenter. And hey, starring Kurt Russell. It's a Kurt Russell double feature. Now, somehow I never saw this movie as a kid. My introduction to it was through John Schnepp, maybe 10 years ago. When I met Schnepp, he and a co-creator were in the process of pitching what I think was an animated show based on the main character, Snake Plissken. I think he showed me a bunch of artwork for it, and I might be getting my memories mixed up, but maybe Samuel L. Jackson was involved. Anyway, Schnepp was confused that I had never seen it, so he recommended I go home and watch it. So I did, and I didn't really understand it at the time. So this week, after watching Big Trouble in Little China, this one seemed like a good pairing as a double review. Now, this film came out in 1981. So what else was coming out in 1981? Well, there was Raiders of the Lost Ark, Clash of the Titans, Time Bandits, and most importantly, Porky's. By the way, I tried watching Porky's this week and wow. Escape from New York was made for $6 million, which is the equivalent of $19.5 million in 2022. And as far as I can tell, that's about the budget for a romantic comedy. Definitely not a proper budget for an action movie, especially one of this scale. Thought it was interesting to go back and see that John Carpenter was about 33 years old when he made this film. And he had already done Halloween and The Fog by then, which were big financial successes. So I'm not sure why they didn't just say, here's all the money. Anyway, the film starts, and the first 3.5 minutes is just white film credits, text, over black with music playing. And you gotta wonder, could any movie get away with that in 2022? I don't think so. If anyone knows of one, let me know, because almost any action movie these days starts with a teaser full of combat and explosions, to make sure you even bother to keep watching it. And here's something else. The star, Kurt Russell, doesn't really get brought into the movie as an active character until almost 18 minutes in. And that is a long time in a movie. And there's a brief scene of him earlier on, but at that point, his part in the plot hasn't even started. These days, a movie will start right in on the main character in the first shot. Now, here's a tip you can take away from this movie. One of the ways to drill in a character's name to the audience, call me Snake. All of the characters in this movie say his name constantly. But then again, he's kind of famous, like a rock star criminal in that world. And he barely has any dialogue himself. Now, coming off of watching Buckaroo Banzai and Big Trouble in Little China, this movie felt super dry. It lacked that catchy dialogue, because I was definitely expecting it after watching Big Trouble in Little China, which was also directed by John Carpenter and starred Kurt Russell. Although that film was shot several years later, and there's definitely not as much surrealism aside from the chandeliers on the front corners of the Cadillac. And here's a concern I had. How is Snake Plissken, a dude with an eye patch, able to fly a plane through a city at night with no depth perception? I read that Kurt Russell had to keep taking breaks and removing the eye patch because it was messing with his eyesight. And folks, what kind of a badass vigilante flies in a glider? Using kinetic wind energy? That's definitely not macho and loud enough. Those tough, backwards parking muscle car dudes in my neighborhood would never put up with that. Plus, I noticed a lot of the glider was painted white. Couldn't they have at least painted it all black for flying in at night? I know they were short on time, but oh well. My main complaint was there's not a lot of character in this movie, as it is very plot-driven. It's very video game-like. Except for that cab driver named Cabby, played by Ernest Borgnine. He is a huge change in tone, in contrast to the seriousness of the rest of the movie. And that character totally woke me up. Got me paying attention again. According to Wikipedia, Cabby was made up by Nick Castle, John Carpenter's co-writer on this film, to try to spice it up. So Cabby takes Snake to a guy named Brain, who is played by Harry Dean Stanton, and for some reason he lives in a public library, and he has converted it into his living room. But he also has an oil rig running in there, going up and down in the background. Now, as much as I like that actor, especially the part he played in Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me, it felt kind of pointless to meet a guy who will take Snake to the other guy who takes him to yet another guy. It's a series of these, and it felt tedious. In fact, much of this movie felt tedious. Another term for that might be shoe leather. And you ever notice when someone gets stabbed in a movie, they just instantly die? Well, there's a term for that, and it's called an instant death stab. Hey, I'm just full of terminology today, huh? But that's what you get here, a free filmmaking education. I understand that due to budget constraints, the set they built of the World Trade Center only had one floor. So taking the stairs, they only had to go up one flight to get to the roof, instead of over 100, I think, were in the original World Trade Center. Because, hey, that would have taken up a lot of screen time and would be a major cardio workout. Imagine having to reshoot that scene a few times. Okay, guys, go back down, start over. The ending of the film seems to wrap up neatly, but I was hoping for a couple of different possible endings. Number one, either they would refuse to save Snake and the countdown would end and he would die. Or two, he finds out there never were explosives. And I thought, what a letdown. But then, there is a second twist at the last moment that reminds us Snake Plissken is always going to be Snake Plissken. Overall, this movie was a cool concept, because Snake Plissken was a memorable main character, and it had striking poster art of the Statue of Liberty's head knocked off. Now, that is some iconic and powerful world building, but in the initial scenes, the Statue of Liberty still has her head. I might be insane or just forgetful, but I never saw her head get knocked off in the actual movie. Maybe that Statue of Liberty head scene was going to be in there, but they had to cut it because they just didn't have the money. So, in my opinion, the execution didn't live up to the super cool premise. And I'm going to guess that was due to its very low budget. And that's not to diminish the nostalgic importance of this film. I know a lot of people love it, and I wanted to be one of them. So I think the filmmaking lessons to extract from Escape from New York might be, number one, double check to make sure the movie lives up to its poster. It can be useful to spend as much time as possible on concept art. Hire a bunch of artists to play with the ideas. Because those ideas could help you come up with even better scenes for your story. Having concept artists just go nuts might seem like working backwards, but it actually works. You can start out with what cool visual scenes need to be in this for it to live up to its concept. And you just find a way to write them in. And filmmaking lesson number 2, when John Carpenter wants to make an action movie set in New York City, give the guy more money. I'll have to watch Escape from LA and see how that one came out. In the end, I gave Escape from New York 4 out of 5 stars on Letterboxd. And if you are on Letterboxd, you can look me up and add me there. My username is Carl Kingdom. If you enjoyed this segment from the Carl King podcast, remember, you can also listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or through an old rubber hose.